Thank you for joining me for Storytime with Tanya for this holiday series story called Strings of Gold, and is inspired by a violinist that I watch on TikTok who seems to be bringing joy to the world through music, and that's where the idea from the story came from. So, without further ado, Strings of Gold, Part 1. The Greyhound bus hissed and groaned as it eased to a halt beneath the flickering yellow glow of the Clarksdale platform lights. Its worn chassis shuddered like an old man's knees under the strain as rust-speckled wheel wells exhaled thick white steam. When the air brakes howled an anguished metallic scream, it reverberated across the empty yard like a wounded beast crying out for mercy. Inside, the stale, clinging warmth of hours on the road lingered in the cracked vinyl seats, scented with diesel oil and the faint tang of body odor. One by one, passengers uncurled stiff limbs, their elbows popping, and fumbled for threadbare coats pulled thin at the seams. They produced crumpled paper bags scented with leftover sandwiches, faces brightening at the promise of crisp night air. Among them stood Elijah Cole, tall, lean, his skin a dark gleaming brown of polished mahogany, warmed by candlelight. His shoulders squared, spine rigid, yet the muscles along his neck and forearms quivered as if each breath carried a personal burden. In his right hand, he held his only treasure, a battered violin case whose once sleek curves were nicked by years of travel. The cracked leather wrapping its handle revealed pale underpinnings, and the brass clasps were mottled with a soft, brassy green patina. Clarksdale had gone quiet, the silence fragile as new snow. Christmas approached, and storefronts darkened early each evening. Through dusty windows, colored bulbs formed halos that pulsed slow and solemn against the night. The hardware store's pine and holly wreath hung limp, its red berries faded by winter's breath. Beneath the only street lamp, itself adorned with sprigs of holly, timber planks groaned underfoot while the lights flickered and cast pale oval pools across the frost-kissed square. A woman, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, patched at the elbows, hurried past, her small son tugging anxiously at her sleeve. His wool cap slipped over one ear, and his breath escaped in tiny cloudbursts. The boy dawdled in his tiny boots, crunching fragile ice. She scolded him in a low voice as they passed the darkened windows of the barber shop, where inside a stout man in suspenders leaned in the doorway, smoking a pipe. Lazy rings curled around his neatly trimmed mustache as the smoke drifted. Elijah set his case gently on the rough-hewn bench beneath the sputtering street lamp. His gloved fingers, calloused and sure, worked the oxidized clasp open with a soft click. The lamp's amber glow caught the bow's gleaming horsehair as the lid lifted. The violin's burnished wood grain, now rich and velvety from years of loving care, glowed. A deep purple velvet lining cradled the instrument like a close-fisted hug. He lifted the violin, tucking its polished body gently against his chin. The polished maple nestled against his skin like a living extension. His bow hovered for a beat, then drifted across the strings in a tentative, trembling caress. A low hum bloomed into the night, vibrating through the still air like distant thunder. Steadying himself, he pressed harder and sprang a clear, weeping note that rippled outward like gentle waves across a frozen pond. The opening strains trembled with sorrow, a mournful cry born from the earth itself. Then, as if chasing away tears, he laced in a sudden playful flourish, a bright skipping melody that twirled between grief and joy. He wove in fragments of the old hymns his grandmother once hummed in a sweltering Alabama kitchen, half-remembered words drifting above each bow-stroked phrase, each note stretched and bent, glowing in the cold like a suspended droplet of light before dissolving into the next. The little boy tugged his mother's skirt again. "Mama, listen," he whispered, eyes wide and shining. She paused, hand over her heart, and let the music wash through her like warm water. Across the square, the barber straightened, releasing a slow plume of smoke. The men lingering by the corner stilled their chatter until it hushed into reverent silence. Elijah's melody held them fast, soft, but insistent, like a gentle guide through the darkness. With eyes closed, Elijah felt his father's voice drift back to him with a quote he'd held dear through dark days. "A violin is a fiddle in one hand and a prayer in the other." He recalled muddy World War I trenches where he'd played for hollow-eyed soldiers, their ragged sobs rising with familiar hymns summoning memories of home. He smelled kerosene lanterns on creaking back porches, heard laughter and sorrow tangled in the same breath as dancing feet stamped out hopeful rhythms. When his bow finally stilled, the square hung in profound stillness. Snowflakes drifted downward without a sound. No one moved, as though the music itself had woven a spell across the cold night. The boy pressed a mittened hand to his mother's arm. "Mama, that sounded like Christmas." Her voice trembled as she answered, "Baby, that sounds like hope." Elijah offered them a gentle, rueful smile, snapped the violin case shut, and lifted it from the bench with effortless grace. Without raising a hand for coins or uttering farewell, he turned and walked away into the silent streets. His music was the gift itself. By morning, Clarksdale would be abuzz with stories. Some would call him a wanderer with a tired fiddle slung over his shoulder. Others would swear the music was a blessing, stitching strangers together beneath the winter stars. And so, with his case at his back and his heavy heart with song, Elijah Cole continued his southward road, his golden strings leaving echoes of joy wherever walls once stood. Thank you for joining me for part 1 of Strings of Gold. This Christmas story is quite special and inspired by a violinist that I heard on TikTok recently. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for part 2.